So the very first thing we're going to do on our fabric that's folded over is draw a line straight across the top. Then on that side that has the two edges that are folded together, we're going to draw another line straight down. This is going to be our back, and then the front, where the fold is going to be the front. Now I like to measure from the neck point to the bust point on the front and mark that down along the fold. Then from the bust point to the underbust, and then from the bust to the waist, marking those lengths all the way down. I'm also measuring to the side where I think that the tunic is going to go, how far down it is, and all the way to the bottom. For me, that's about knee length, giving a little extra. I put little marks down so I know which is which later. Then I do the same for the back, but I did take out that underbust measurement because it is about the same as the front. Now it is harder to measure yourself, so if you have someone else with you, I highly recommend it. It would make life way easier. And I just transferred those measurements all the way down that back line and all the way down that front line, as you can see. They are going to be different, and that is okay. I had to extend that back line just a little bit. Now I measured from my center neck to my neck point, where my neck meets my shoulder, and marked that on both my front and my back. Then I measured all the way across the shoulder, making that mark as well. I measured my front bust next, which is from your center point all the way to a side seam in the front along the bust, and I did the same on the underbust and marked those horizontal measurements down perpendicular to that folded line. So I just used a right angle and drew the line out, all of those vertical lines, and did the same on the back because that is our next step. So then I measured all the way around my bust and I subtracted my front bust measurement, and that gave me my back bust measurement. Now we are working on just 1/4 of the pattern, so I only used half of the front bust measurement and half of the back bust measurement. Then I did the same for the under bust, and for the waist you can see I was like, gotta have not my long sleeve shirt on under this. And measured out 1/4 of my waist along those waistlines on each side. I then marked out my 1/4 hip measurement down where I wanted the side seam to split on both the front and back, and double checked that I had the same length from waist to hip on front and back. For me, it is actually the same measurement. Then I did a quick eyeball measurement of how far across I thought the front should be. I think it ended up being about 7 inches total, so 3.5 on both sides, and marked that. I connected my waist to hip measurement and my bust to waist. You can see I did use a hip curve. It's just a slight curve outwards in the top 1/3, and the rest is straight up. Now I did raise about 2 inches above my underarm at the end of the bust measurement there. I find 2 inches is nice and comfortable. It's not too high into my armpit, but it's not so low that you're going to be seeing the bra strap. Now my waist came in way too much on my front piece there, so I put it out about 1 inch, knowing that when I put it on I was going to add a dart. You can see me just kind of pulling that dart together with my hands. So the very next step was to connect it from the hip line down to the bottom. Now I drew that bottom line across perpendicular to my side seam, and then I kind of curved in from where I wanted that hip line to end, about 1/4 of the way down, and then drew out the rest. And this is when I realized that my bust to waist measurements were completely off, because I am short-waisted in the back. I've got a bit of a sway back. And I had to figure out how I wanted to fix this. So there are different ways of doing it. I had quite a bit of a difference. So my thought was to add a secondary dart to the front on the bust line would be the best bet. Now, Vex'ahlia is quite busty. My plan was to wear a double push-up with this, so extra shaping in the front, especially as I was working with a non-stretch fabric, was really the best way to go about this. So I measured out how much that difference was, and I added a bit at the underarm to the back because that was a straight line across. Gave myself a new bust line. And then I also drew where that bust dart would be on the front, which was about in line with the bust, and I came out about 1 inch away from the apex. Now the apex is about where your nipple is, so you can see I switched marker colors just to make this easier to see. Now going back to the shoulder, I tend to jump around a bit. I always go up 1/4 of an inch at the neck point and down 1/4 of an inch at the shoulder point. This is because most people do have a very slightly sloped shoulder. It is normal. I also measured from my neck down in the back how far I wanted it. It was 1.5 inches for me. That is standard. And then I just scooped from the neck point down to there, making sure that I had a right angle at the neck point and where it met that back seam. Then I marked 1 inch up from the bust line. That's where I wanted the V-neck to go, and just drew a line from my center front neck all the way down. To make the armholes, I drew a right angle down from my shoulder point, which is where your shoulder meets your arm, and I drew a right angle in that underarm hole. I connected them with a J shape, just generally. And then I realized that my front was looking way too small. So I ended up taking that armhole down about 1 inch and adjusted all of my horizontal lines to match. You can see me redrawing my waist to hip, and then also redrawing the hem at the very bottom to have this new line to match. Now it was time to add the little extra because hers go past her shoulder point, and I added about 1 inch. And then just curved that in about 2/3 of the way down. I didn't want to go too far into the curve of the armhole because that's going to gather oddly, and I was quite happy with it. Now, because she's got a standing collar that folds over, I took a look at what that extra fabric in the front looked like, and I actually quite liked the width of it, so decided that that fold line was actually going to become my cut line just in that top section above the bust line. So what I ended up doing was drawing it as if the neck had come all the way around. So I went down that 1.5 inch and scooped it, and that became my new neckline in the front that I could then fold over when it was time. I drew it in another color just so I knew what was going on and where everything was going. It started getting quite complicated. So I decided to make the collar like it was a normal stand collar that just folded out. So I made a right angle and then drew all the way across. From the taller line, I measured out my back neck measurement around that curve, marked it, which was my shoulder point, and then measured the front neck measurement around the front curve and marked that. I went up about 1/2 inch and then curved it back down to that line. I measured a right angle and then measured how tall I wanted the collar to be. For me, this was about 2.5 inches. And I measured up that 2.5 inches all the way across and connected the line. I did end up flaring the front out just a little bit because hers has a little zhuzh to it. The very last step was cutting everything out with seam allowance. So I like to give myself a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I find that's easiest to work with. I give myself a little bit more on that back seam where the zipper is going to go, and a tiny bit more at the bottom because you can always take it in. And yeah, just cut the whole thing out. You can go ahead of time and add all your seam allowance if you're not as confident about it. And then it was time to take everything to the sewing machine. Now, this is considered a mock-up. We're gonna sew the whole thing together and try it on and see how it fits. And to sew it together, we're going to use what's called a basting stitch. This is just a nice long length, so it's fast and easy and quick to take out once we're done. So to sew this, because apparently I did not film it, because I'm really cool, it's pretty straightforward. The very first thing we did was sew the darts on the front. Then we laid the back down, put the front on top, and sewed the shoulder seams, and then all the way down the side on both sides, both pieces. After that, we put the collar on. Now the part that goes up is the front. That notch is the shoulder seam all the way back. Then we sewed in the zipper all the way up, making sure that the neck part of the zipper attached. Once the zipper was done, we just finished off the bottom piece here. I wish I had filmed it for you, but live and learn. Ooh, it's a little tight on the hips, that's good to know. We can expand that. The zipper is hard to do up, inside out, and on yourself. Okay, well that gives me an idea. I'm pretty happy with the collar. No, I do like it coming out like that, because it's gonna be like that. Yeah, so we do want that little flare. Great. Yeah, so I need to add more to the hips, because it's a little tight. I would say 1.5 inches on each side, adding a plus 1.5 inches there. And that is about where hers hit her, right above the hip dip. Well, that is on the hip dip. Let's come back to that. Firstly, it's a little too far out. Like, this is too far. This is really too far out. We want it a bit, not that much. If I do it like that, where the initially was, yeah, that's a better placement for me, just past the shoulder. And we'll take it in. I'm gonna need a dart here, aren't I? Yeah. There's gonna be a lot of darts on this, because I really want it to fit well, just to get rid of all that excess material. I'd rather have a couple darts and have it look like it fits properly. So then we would follow this line up to a point here. Great. And then, so that comes in about just where the bra line is to about there. Yeah, because then when that's open, we still see a bit of the light blue. So this will be the dark blue, this will be the light blue. Great, we'll copy that to the other side. And obviously this is a lot of extra fabric. So we're going to pin this directly under the bust. I don't mind it being a little loose through the waist because, as I said, we're gonna have the piece over top. And there's no stretch in the fabric, so I don't want it to be too tight. And then we'll come back down to nothing. Have it kind of fade away. Does it need to come down a touch? Yeah, we're not really getting any cleavage, are we? So, I think, we could go straight to bust point. Yeah, why not? That's gonna be our line for how far down it goes. So for this, we're gonna have the blue underneath, and I just wanna mark how far it needs to line. I think about that much, so that when it flips open, we don't see it. Okay. Oh, I do need to finish the line here. Now I am pinning it on both sides, but when we actually do it, we're only gonna look at one side. And because this is exactly on me, I want to draw this so I can get that cup shape. Great. So there we are. I think it's the right length if we hem this like that, just past the knee. How's the width looking? Let me pin this. Okay, it's a little wide. It feels like it's sitting a little low. I feel like it should only go to like here. And that be the edge. That's what my instinct says. It's like right here on the leg. Oh, hers is above that. It's the curve of her butt, so it should be here. And then her waist piece goes here. I'm not as long torsoed as she is. All right, all right. So we're gonna cut it here, which means we don't need to add anything to here. Okay. Let's cut this. That looks right to me. Yeah, because if we do that, then we get the curve of the butt that she has. Yeah, you can actually see the butt. Otherwise you can't. And then if the front, it hangs about like that. I'm guessing. A lot of this is based just on what it looks like visually. And we'll copy that shape to the back. I think this has to come in just a touch here. More like that. There we go. We'll smooth that out just a little bit, but yeah. I like how it's sitting. It will sit up when it's time and out. Still unsure about this, if it should be this or this. I'm gonna take some selfies and see. But here we go, step one. It's got some space here, which is nice. Got a bit of breathing room, not much. I'm gonna try and get out of this now. So we've done all of our markings. Now it's time to fix our pattern. So I'm gonna start up here. We're really only looking at half of it. I did decide that we're gonna take this back to here because it looks better on. Actually, I think we're gonna split the difference and do it halfway, because that looks best. So this neck piece, I'm just gonna rip right off, and then with the green, because that's the color I have, I'm going to draw in between, and we're gonna cut off the seam allowance, and it's good to go. So the neck piece is good. We're gonna put that to the side. We're gonna be cutting this out of the darker fabric. I'm going to take my zipper out. This is the nice thing about using a nice, easy basting stitch. This is 2 seconds. Keep that for other things. So, looking at the front, I'm going to rip it apart straight down the middle. And then this whole half, we're just gonna take the pins out and not worry about. Now you can double check that you've measured the same side to side. I trust myself to be able to have measured that no problem. So I'm not gonna worry about it. So we liked this as the bottom and this as the side. I'm just drawing along that. Now I'm not drawing right here because we wanted to make that a little rounder. So now I can unpin this bottom part. And I think I can actually lay this on top of here. So I've just made sure that this part's laying flat and that this center is with the seam on the back. And I've got this line of our new amount, so I can cut just the seam allowance amount off. And I'm doing the front and back at the same time. Now I am giving myself a very small seam allowance here because I want it to be a very small. Okay, so that is the bottom part done. Now looking at the back, there are no other alterations. Oh, we have the shoulder. Okay. So the easiest way to do this is I'm going to cut a seam allowance amount at this curve so that when I unfold it, it would be the same amount. However, we have this black line of where we want the armhole to be, so I'm gonna retrace that. We can take that off now, and I can cut that seam allowance amount. There we go. Now for this seam here, I need a dart point, and I've already traced with yellow where I want that seam to be. So now all I have to do is trace that in red so we can actually see it. And there's that dart, traced and ready to go. We've got this line here, which I will do in blue. So this is our armhole. Because it is a different color, I'm going to meet this up here and bring it down to nothing. So I've just traced it on the other side of the dart. And then here, we're just going to continue it to here. So this is the darker color. This is just showing where I'm gonna do this one in a dotted line. We're gonna go just a little lower. This is where it needs to be on the lining as like an interfacing, just so I know where that is. And we only have one more dart left to go. This dart, which does actually have the lines on it. And yes, we do have a lot of darts. We end up having 3 darts. Now you can use a ruler, but I do want this to be a curved line. And I'm taking it in just a little bit, so it'll be smaller than it was when I was wearing it. So the next step is I'm actually going to cut this as one piece along this line, and then I'm going to piece this together and pin that so it's one continuous piece, because we don't have to put a dart in this piece here. So that's our dark piece, and this is the F front, B back. So those are my 2 dark pieces for sure. These will be bright pieces. Oh, I don't need this neck piece because we're going to keep the other neck piece. And I can take these 2 apart. And then I just want to undo this dart. I am just going to notch this dart. So the pieces we need in the bright blue are just these pieces. This one is a place on fold. But let's get to it. Let's cut that out. These are dark pieces, and then we're also going to need some dark pieces from this. And let's hope we have enough of this bright blue. Yeah, we definitely do. Okay, great. And the nice thing is we don't have to line this because we will be using the darker color to line everything. And I actually will use my pins for this because I do not want it to shift. I don't always use pins, but when I have limited amounts of fabric. And then we're gonna play a game of where's the best place to put this. Because if I did it like this, I think that's my best bet. I think that leaves me the most fabric left over. Unless I can somehow, I don't think it's gonna fit like, no. I don't wanna waste a bunch of fabric. And the other option of doing it like this, oh, you know what? Leaves me a wide chunk, so that's what we'll do. We'll do it the normal way. Because that way these are facing the same direction, just in case they shine slightly differently. And then we can cut that out. Now I do have to add seam allowance here and here, because we cut out the detail part there. If you're worried you're not going to remember, this is when I would use chalk and just draw on your actual good fabric to remind yourself. Okay, now I do have to take off this piece so that I can have it for the lining material. At some point I have to find a zipper this color. So we'll put that to the side, and this can go live by the machine for now. And our front, and what I am going to do is take a moment and put the marks for the darts on here, so I know where all of my end points are. And all I do to do that is I put my finger down and peel back and mark where my finger is. It's pretty straightforward. We can take off all the pins because we're definitely gonna need this. Oh, you know what I should do though is mark how far down it's going in the front, which is there. And I'm gonna take a moment and draw these lines. And I'm gonna sew this and then cut it. I think that's gonna be better. It'll get me a better edge. Trust me. All right. Now we have our fabric that we're using for the sleeves and all the bits and bobs. And first things first, looking at this front piece, I'm going to trace out the piece that I want, which is about here, and it goes till about here. Now I do have to add seam allowance on this side, like that. And that's all there is from the front piece. Huh, thought there was more. I was wrong. From the back piece, it's just a small bit. Up here at the neck, adding seam allowance to that. Just gonna pin these so they don't shift on me. It is a beautiful lightweight fabric, which means it's shifty. Then I have my shoulder piece, which if I cut like this, does the front and back. And my neck piece, now I do need 4 neck pieces in total, because we're gonna line it with itself, which is easy enough to do. That's what I want, but I need a tiny bit of seam allowance, because the other option is this. I think that's what we're gonna have to do, so that I can put seam allowance on it. Okay. Marking where that center is, and I'm just drawing the seam allowance on. There we go. This is the front here. And we can cut these all out. Okay, so we've got our 2 collar pieces, which we're just going to put to the side for now. We're going to copy over all those darts. There we go. That way, we can pin this on. And we're going to pin this onto the good side. So we're pinning this on because we're going to sew all the way down on one side to here, across, and all the way up. Is that my mark? Yep, perfect. And then we'll flip it to the wrong side. That sounds like a lot. It's only because it is. We'll go to the sewing machine now. So first things first, we're going to go down one side of this and up the other, just to the side of the center seam here. And I like to sew at about a 3 length. I find that's best for my machine. Now I'm going all the way down to that mark. Then I'm going to go across 2 stitches. Well, let's make that 3. And then back up. I'm going to trim my threads. And now I'm going to cut down that line very carefully, making sure not to cut any of the stitching lines. And I'm going to cut a little Y at the bottom so I can cut into the 2 corners. And then I'm going to flip this so it's on the inside. I'm going to press all my seam allowance. No, we're just going to top stitch this. Now you can iron this first. In fact, I recommend it. I just don't have my iron handy. And I'm going to make sure that's right on the edge and stitch all the way up. All the way down, across, and around. So now we have a nice finished neckline. And I'm not too worried about that tiny bit that flipped over because it's going to be open like that. So the next step is attaching the back. And we also have to attach the back of the neck piece, which I'm going to do next. And now I put this on the underside so that when it gets folded up, all the seam allowance is hidden on the inside. I'm also going to top stitch that. So that's one side. I'm going to do the same for this side. So putting it underneath. And then top stitch. Now I'm actually going to switch to my light blue thread. And we're going to attach the back. Oh, before we attach the back, we're going to do all of the darts. All 6 of them. Remember to back tack at the front, at the beginning and end of your darts too. Oh, I never fixed the amounts here of the side seam. And we do want to trim the extra seam allowance off of our darts as well. The side darts, it doesn't make as much a difference. It'll make the most difference in the body darts. Okay, and now we're going to fold this right side up, and we're going to attach the back pieces at the top. And I'm putting the back on top so that our seam allowance is facing the right way again. So that our seam allowance is trapped on the inside, basically. And I am just going to top stitch the seam allowance down, facing towards the back, always, always. So now, looking at the back, we want to top stitch all this down, but before I do that, I'm just going to give it a quick baste around the neck. I'm just going to use what I have in the machine because it doesn't have to be anything. We're going to have it covered. And this just keeps these 2 pieces of fabric together. Now you'll probably want to do this next step at an ironing board. I'm just going to do it here. But what I'm going to do is fold this under all the way around and pin it, and then we're going to go around and stitch it down. So we will see this stitching on the front, but I want to make sure that this stays where I want it to, and I don't mind seeing some stitching on the front in order to have the collar look nice. And honestly, I'm less worried about the back because her hair is going to be there. Okay, and the last little bit is up here. So yeah, I do suggest doing this on an ironing board because you can press it right away. I just don't want to hunt down my ironing board. I just realized we need a second one of these. We need 2 sets. So I'm just going to cut one of those as well. But first let's sew this on. So I'm going to switch my top thread again back to the darker color. And we're going to stitch this down all the way around. Perfect. Barely visible on the front, and when that slings open, it'll look fantastic. Next, we're going to attach these sleeves, and we're going to work on the collar at the same time. Now you could put interfacing in the sleeves and in the collar. I'm going to rely on the actual fabric to stand up the way I want it to, because I want this to be fairly casual feeling. And to start, this is the outside edge. Nope, no it's not. This is the outside edge, this weird wonky doodle one. I'm gonna sew that twice, once for each one. And I'm going to trim back the extra seam allowance here. Trim my threads, always, always. Now, because this is a swoop, you want to trim the seam allowance so that it can fold properly. And that means we're clipping it and we're just cutting in it in a bunch of different spots, all the way to the sewing line, but not through. That way, when it flips right side out, it can actually lay nicely. And we're gonna sew the same on the other one and trim it the same way. And while we're here, we're gonna take this collar. The front is the part that swoops up. So we're just gonna sew half the way around so the back is still open. And we're gonna trim that corner. And we'll sew this one. Putting the sleeves to the side for a moment, we're gonna work on the collar. Now, this is our good side. And we are going to sew, so we're gonna flip this open, and we're gonna line up this seam with this collar seam here, and we're just going to sew this one side all the way around the collar. There's so much extra fabric. Now you want to do it little by little because they curve in opposite directions. So you sew a little and then you match the curves, then you sew a little and then you match the curves. And my notch is lining up with my shoulder seam, so that's great. And you can flip this right side out if you'd like, just to get an idea of what the collar is going to look like, which is fantastic. And we're going to sew the other one the same way. Which means we go to the center front again where that line is. And then we find the inside of this collar and we match it up with the center line here. And then we're going to sew them up. And this time the collar's on top. Then, looking at the collar, we're going to trim a bunch of this extra here where the blue is. Fold this extra seam allowance of the collar up. And we are going to end up stitching in the ditch. So the trick to this is you pin from this side and you make sure that it's catching your material on the other side. So that is too much material. We want it just past that stitching line. And again, this is one of those times where ironing is very helpful. But you can see that stitching line, and that's like your guide for where to fold it. And we're not going to go all the way to the back because I do want to put this around the zipper. We're just going to go to about 1 inch to 3/4 of an inch from the back. There we go. And we're going to pin it the same on the other side. Okay, and then we're going to switch to a light blue top thread. And stitch it in the ditch along the front. So I'm starting at the front and working my way to the back. That's just personal preference. So my bottom thread is still the dark thread. So there's a couple places where it jumped up. I don't think it's super noticeable. It did catch all on the inside, and that was my main concern. And now I'm going to do the other side. And it caught, except for this tiny bit, but that's not enough to make a difference. Ooh, and right here at the front. Of course you didn't catch right at the front. That would be too easy. So we're going to just re-stitch that little bit. Okay, now it's time to go move on to the sleeves. So I'm going to take the good side, put it down here. I'm matching up my notches, and I'm going to sew all the way down the front, and then I'm going to go back and sew all the way down the back. We're just doing something very similar for the sleeves that we just did to the collar. And we're going to do the same for the other side, knowing that the back is facing us. And it's pretty much the same thing, except we don't have to be nearly as careful because we're not going to see this side. So I'm going to start at the shoulder seam. Yeah, I do still have to pin it. And it's going back kind of to nothing at the armpit. Okay, and now we're going to sew both of these. Okay, there's one. Sleeve done. Do I want to top stitch? Yeah, I think I'm gonna switch back to dark colors and top stitch this at some point. And let's do the other sleeve. Alright, and we are gonna switch our bottom thread to our light color. And now's the fun part. We're going to take this, line up our underarms, make sure it's the correct one, and sew our sides together. Do the same on the other side. And I'm lining up my bust notches and my waist notches. Now we can finish off the armhole. So I'm just going to trim these so they're the same height. And to finish off the armhole, whoop, there's a lot going on here. We're going to look at the inside, and all I'm going to do is fold it. Open up this side seam, and then I'm going to fold it over twice so the finished top edge is the same edge as where the dark blue is attached. And then I'm just adding some more stitching on top of the dark blue to really hold it in place. I'm going to trim this little bit of fabric out of the way and trim my threads. So let's do the other underarm, because after this underarm it's just the zipper and the hem all the way around, and it'll be done. So next we have to put in the zipper, because we can't do the back seam until we have the zipper in. Okie dokie. So we're gonna swap this out for an invisible foot instead of a normal foot. And we'll leave it on just this color for now. We'll switch later. So we want to pin the back out of the way because we don't want to stitch that down. So I've got this pinned out of the way. And then I always like to figure out how it's going to end. It's going to end like this, so we place it face down. And I'm just gonna stitch it down to start. And I'm not caring about getting it close to the edge, because at this point I'm just stitching it down. And then we zip it up, and we hold this up to make sure. Oh, gonna pin that out of the way like we did on the other side. And this is what we want to make sure matches up, is this right here, the neckline. So I'm actually gonna stitch it like this. We're gonna do this from this way so I can see what's happening. And we'll just get that top part again. Actually, I think at this point we can actually sew down the zipper. So this is where we're using the foot. Okay, so the trick with these is to push the zipper all the way open. So I always like to stitch the zipper down first, as you saw. And then I like to always start at the top, so I switch this to the other side and sew down this side. So now I'm going to trim all my extra threads up at the top here. Oh, we do have to come back just a little bit on that. And to finish off the top, all I'm going to do, put all my extra bits in, and I'm just going to top stitch around. And do that on both sides, and I'll also get the tops at the same time. But before we do that, let's sew this all together. So I'm starting at the last spot that's sewn onto the zipper, and stitching that, and then just stitching all the way down. And I am going to switch back to my other normal foot, because we're done with all the zipper bits, and I just find it easier. It's my favorite foot. Now, I do want to do something with this material here, and that's a little uneven, so we're just going to trim that. We're going to fake it, because we're going to see this from the other side, because this is the back flap. There's a couple different things we could do. But what I like is I'm gonna open it up, fold them in half, and then fold it together and stitch that. And then there's no unfinished seams. And this is again one of those times when you would want to iron. But if your fabric doesn't fray and it doesn't bother you visually, you can totally just leave it. And now the very last part, hemming all of this. I'm gonna start at the very back. Well, the second last part, I guess. We did a very small hem. So I'm just folding it over twice and sewing it all the way around. Now to get the corners, I'm actually folding it and pinning it, and I'm going to be using the pin to move things around. And we're just going to go all the way around on that. Alright, and the last bit is the top part. Alright, we're going to switch back to our dark thread. Okay, well, that's fine. I'm just going to trim that. So, zipper flips in, and this folds here. And we're just going to stitch all the way around. But I am going to stitch this way till about the halfway point, and then I'm going to switch because my threads are two slightly different colors. And we will end up putting a hook and eye at the top here just to hold it, and then we'll do the same on the other side. Okay, and then the last thing is we're just going to top stitch here. And all that's left is attaching the fur. I'm actually really happy with it. It needs an iron, obviously. It's a little poofy here. This will flatten out once it's ironed. And I do like that it has a bit of movement, but not right here. It's very boob shelfy, which is what I wanted because she's well endowed. And the back feels good. It's, you can see the zipper a bit here. I'm okay with that. When I've got the hair and the fur, you're not gonna see that. I guess, ooh, I should flip that down. It's a little dusty. I do still have to add the fur, and I should have shifted this forward just a touch because I think it's, there we go. It just keeps wanting to rise just a touch, but that's okay. Yeah, I should have shifted this forward just a bit because it doesn't look quite right, but it's not enough of an issue that I'm gonna remake it. I really, really like how this turned out. Last bit is the fur shoulder. So, I've got my tunic. All right, I've got my mock-up fabric, I've got my shoulder piece. Now it does look like it's the same front and back. So what I would like to do is use this piece here, this fold. So I put my tunic down and I traced over where the shoulder was, where the neck seam was front and back, and also where the shoulder itself was. Kind of measured on myself with my fingers how far down I thought it should go in the front and back, and I went to about bicep length down the arm. What I've done is from this shoulder point, I've taken it in just a bit so it'll curve. I don't want it to sit flat out on my arm, and I don't want it to buckle in the front where it has too much fabric. We may end up, I'm actually gonna turn that more. So we're gonna cut this out. Okay, now I've cut one side for the front, one side for the back. And I only wanted it that far on the back. Okay, now I'm just gonna pin along here and throw it on my own shoulder and see how it looks. Now keep in mind with the fur, it will go further than this does because the fur has long bits on it. Okay, and then I'm just going to throw it on. Yeah, I think it needs to go just a little bit more down on the back. Not by much, just like a curve here, like that. There we go. So we are good to cut this out. Again, it's really just kind of getting a feeling for what you want it to look like. So I realized that I want all my fur to go down, so I am actually going to cut this and make it two pieces. So with fur, it's really important to make sure it's going in the direction that you want it to. And I really want the fur to go downwards. Fur gets everywhere, it does suck. And I did like the look with the seam allowance, so I'm gonna keep the seam allowance on it. I am gonna take off the seam allowance here. Ah, oh ho ho, I almost cut that the wrong way. That could have been bad. This is why we double check. If I wanted it, yeah. I think I want it like this so that it comes straight down the arm. Which means in theory that I'm cutting it like this. There we go. Adding some seam allowance here. Adding that back curve. Back. That's the front. There's a couple different ways to do this. You can use a roller cutter, but I don't like that because then you cut the fur underneath. I prefer to do it with scissors and kind of use the scissors to part the long fur underneath. It takes longer and you will end up with a lot more fluffy bits, but it keeps the fur as long as possible. And because this fur does not fray, I'm not going to finish these edges. That's one of the reasons I'm leaving the fur as long as possible. Shoulder piece. Okay, all that's left is we're gonna sew this. I'm not gonna show you because literally we're just sewing back and forth along there. So we'll be right back. Oh. When you do sew this, you wanna push all of the fur inside as much as possible. So I did end up curving it a bit more on the bottom, so it's a little softer there. And then what I like to do is go through with my fingers and pull the fur from the curve, from where we've sewn, and then it's really not noticeable. So I've grabbed some snaps, I've grabbed my top, and we are going to add some snaps. I'm going to add one on the shoulder and one on the back. I kind of want to let this part lead. I might end up tacking that in. I think I will. Like that. So I'm going to tack that to itself. But yeah, snaps there, snaps there. Oh, look at this. There's so much fur just everywhere. Okay, so we're going to need 2 snaps. So my rule of thumb for something like this is that I take 2 threads, front and back, of the same thread, and then we tie it together. So I'm just going to do this first. So my rule of thumb is I like to do the flat part on the part that's going on the body. And then I like to do the like poofy part on the actual outfit. That way it doesn't hurt when you're snapping it in. Otherwise, sometimes this little prong here can hurt when you're putting it on. So I think what we're gonna do is start on this side. And because my needle has 4 strands of thread on it, I only have to go around each hole twice to get a nice secure attachment point. Switching to blue thread for my blue tunic. Okay, so starting with the shoulder. Now, I really wanted to keep the fur as a separate piece. In theory, you could just tack it down. The issue is that fur is really hard to wash. And I want to wear this to potentially a convention in the summer, which means that I'm probably going to want to wash it because the underarms are going to get, you know, it's hot. It's like a polyester taffeta. I'm going to sweat. And because I can't wash fur, I don't want to have to untack and retack it every time I want to wear it. I want to be able to just unpop it. And then if anything ever happens to the fur, it's 2 seconds for me to actually make a new piece. So to do the back piece, I like to just attach that snap and see where I kind of put them together but don't clip them in. And then I hold this where it would go, and then I put my finger just on the snap underneath. Now it's done. And I'm just gonna take this comb and I'm just using this comb to kind of brush out. So I'm just using my fingers to pull these back and kind of clump them up. Ta-da! So overall thoughts on the tunic, really happy. This could have a bit more body to it, and it does sometimes flip back. I should in theory put just one more snap here to hold it,
but it moves nicely. These move great. I'm watching myself on the monitor. I like how they look. They're hitting in the right spots. You can still see some leg, but not too much leg. See, now it's going. But it's really easy to keep an eye on, and it would be 2 seconds to fix. This comes off so that I can wash it, which I did wash it and forgot to take it off. So the fur has gone through the washer and still looks okay. It washed really well, and then I just pressed it for this shoot. I wore it to a con, so I wore it all day. And then I washed it and it still looks good. I'm still happy. I think I'll just do the theme song and then we'll do some close-ups. It's Thursday night. All ye critters come join us. It's time to continue our plight. There is magic and mystery. Who knows what will happen? He might. But one thing's for sure, we never give up on the fight. I think my timing was totally off.